Hey guys, welcome back. So in today's videos, I thought it would be an interesting idea to go over where exactly the 13th Doctor was extracted from her timeline to be able to appear in the reality war. Now, I do agree with Ross C. Davis where he said that from having not Jodie Whittaker regenerate into Ncuti Gatwa, it feels like they missed out on something, and I do agree. So to be able to have them interact was really nice in the reality war, and to have the 13th Doctor back as well was so brilliant. Being a massive 13th Doctor fan myself, it was brilliant to see her back, and I feel like in 2025 we've been very lucky so far. Of course, as we'll be speaking about today, we've had her in the reality war, we've now got her in her own series in Big Finish, and of course this month's Doctor Who magazine was a whole magazine dedicated to her, so we've been quite lucky this year. But I wanted to sort of go over where exactly from her timeline she was extracted from, because I feel like it's an interesting thing to talk about. So without no further ado, let's get into it. To be honest, it could be several places or in between episodes, but personally for me, I feel like it happens between the gap of the Halloween apocalypse and the War of the Sontarans with the Flux going on, and I feel like the Flux actually links into it. Now, the reason I believe this is because, of course, at the end of the Halloween apocalypse, the TARDIS gets ravaged by the Flux, and then she's thrown onto the battleground of War of the Sontarans. But between that, we don't actually know what happened. Now, it could be a possibility that before the TARDIS threw her onto the battlefield, the TARDIS could have actually threw her into the future. Now, as the 13th Doctor said in the reality war herself, cause and effect are getting a little bit out of order, and that's exactly what the Flux was doing to not only the TARDIS, but also to the planet Time, disrupting time. So, I feel like this could be a good sort of strong point from where it actually happened. And don't forget, in our time as well, things were out of order as well. Of course, in this reality, you had Poppy who didn't exist, so things were out of order, just like they were for in the Flux. And this could possibly be why these two times and these two Doctors merged, because they were both in a moment where things were out of order. Now, another reason I believe it comes between the Halloween apocalypse and the War of the Sontarans is because just before the 13th Doctor met the 15th Doctor saying this theory is true, or is correct, then it would make sense because she smashed open the console and poured the vortex energy into the Flux before it ravaged the TARDIS. Now, saying the 13th Doctor and the 15th Doctor met at this instance, straight afterwards, where the 15th Doctor poured his regeneration energy into the console, both times it affected the vortex energy. You had the vortex energy going into the Flux and regeneration energy going into the console. Now, these two times could have caused this sort of merge where both times the console does sort of mess up, and that's why these two Doctors are linked, and possibly why the TARDIS is merged as well. I feel like the TARDIS also plays a part in this, and why the 13th Doctor and 15th Doctor met at this specific moment. Speaking about the 15th Doctor now, I imagine this incident somehow birthed the Doctor regenerating into Billie Piper, either into Bad Wolf itself or the 16th Doctor. For the reason for that is, of course, Billie Piper, or Rose rather, in the parting of the ways, absorbed the time vortex energy and then became Bad Wolf. Now, with her messing with the console and vortex energy itself, that possibly could have imprinted her face onto the console, and therefore why the 15th Doctor has regenerated into that face, because she messed with the time vortex, the TARDIS remembered her face, and of course the 15th Doctor put his regeneration energy into the time vortex and to the console itself, and possibly why this face has returned. But how or why specifically, and what this is going to mean for the Doctor, is a different story. Also, they did show the console just before the climax of the regeneration with the 15th Doctor, so is this possibly a hint again? The console, the time vortex, and this face plays a big part in this regeneration. Back to the 13th Doctor now, the only inconsistency we have is the fact that she's wearing the yellow braces in the reality war. Now, of course, if you know, from Series 11 to the end of Series 12, she wore the yellow braces, but from the Flux onwards, she wore the blue braces. Now, if she comes from the Flux, why is she wearing the yellow? Now, this could be a number of reasons. Personally, for me, I could say that the in-show reason is the fact that time is messed up, therefore her costume's messed up, and not everything makes sense. But personally, for me, the sort of real-life reason, I just feel that people sort of know her more for the yellow braces, therefore the costume department just went with the yellow ones, to be fair. I also feel like this is where the 13th Doctor was extracted from because of the mention of Yaz, and by the sounds of it, it was quite far into the development of Thasmin. Now, of course, in Series 11, it didn't really exist. In Series 12, it started to blossom very slightly and subtly, became more apparent in the Flux and sort of dominated the specials in 2022. Now, of course, with that being said, it would make more sense for the 13th Doctor to come from, say, in between the specials, But for all we know, the 13th Doctor could have had those feelings for Yaz way before that. If you think about it, before the Flux, they'd spent quite a lot of time travelling together, as we're sort of exploring in the Big Finish audio dramas. So the 13th Doctor could have had those feelings way before the Flux. It's just not said by the 13th Doctor, because that's very her, and she didn't really want to get attached either. I also felt this happened in the early Flux, because by the end of the Flux, the 13th Doctor was warned by time that her time was heading to its end. Now, when you look at when two Doctors' paths have crossed, for example, the 12th Doctor and the 1st Doctor in Twice Upon a Time, they've sort of consoled each other and shared in the mutual fear and worry that comes with each regeneration. But when the 13th Doctor met the 15th Doctor, this didn't happen. She reassured him, but didn't sort of share that sort of mutual worry. Now, this is probably because the 13th Doctor didn't know in her timeline she was regenerating yet. Therefore, more proof this come from before the late end of the Flux, more likely the early. Now, for argument's sake as well, you could say, well, maybe she did know about her regeneration, but she just wanted to sort of solely focus on the 15th Doctor, didn't really want to make it about herself, and she was very good at hiding her feelings, and she often did. However, I feel like if she knew about her regeneration, she would have sort of shared in the mutual worry, so the 15th Doctor felt less alone. So again, I don't actually feel like that's very likely. I just feel like the reason she never mentioned her own regeneration and sort of shared in the worry like other Doctors would have is because she didn't know yet herself. So again, another sort of reason I feel like this comes from the early Flux between the Halloween Apocalypse and the War of the Sontarans. So I definitely feel like this is the point she comes from, just when time is all over the place in her timeline is the perfect time for a time schism to hit when time is vulnerable, I feel, as 13 mentions to 15. Also, as mentioned earlier, both times the time vortex is in danger of being ruptured and therefore could damage the whole of creation. That is why it fits perfectly and why it makes sense 13 was the Doctor to reappear, giving the best and friendliest advice out of all the Doctors who could have appeared, talking about going out with a lovely smile. But what are your thoughts? Do you agree, do you disagree, or do you have a theory of your own of where she comes from in her timeline? I'd love to know, so let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and hopefully see you in my next video soon. Thank you for watching and take care.